ISVP. Hello, speakers. It's so nice to have you here today to talk about how to grow on your career as a RevOps leader. I have two amazing speakers here. Audience, thank you so much for joining us today. While I introduce the speakers and we do a quick icebreaker, audience, why don't you go onto the public chat and tell us where you're calling from? We'd love to know from you. I saw that Sarah asked about the recording. The recording will be available later today, but let me go through my icebreaker with my speakers today, and it is a surprise. So we're going to have a very real answer from them. Oh, we have someone from Chicago. Um, Rachel, when you were younger, what did you frequently got in trouble for?
Oh man, that's a hard one. I was such a good kid when I was little. Um,
No trouble at all? Like nothing? Bad grades?
no, that's a hard question. I was like that people pleasing kid, so
Mm.
I stayed pretty much out of trouble. I'm trying to think of a time that I actually did get in trouble. I feel like I knew too much, and
Mhm.
then I asked too many questions. And I probably get in trouble for asking too many questions, too many whys, a little bit beyond my years. So that I think that got me most in trouble.
That sounds good, and maybe that's why you work with RevOps today. You have to ask too many questions. What about you, Wushan? What is something that you got in trouble for when you were a kid?
So I didn't make a lot of notes. Basically, you were expected to do some amount of notes in classes, and I used to keep a lot of stuff in my head, and that sort of worked out. So I think I got a lot of pushback from my teachers on assignments and stuff. That was, I think, was a repetitive thing. I think I through all throughout my school.
Awesome. So I'll feel bad grades here and there, but all good, right? We're all here today, all sales leaders. So it worked out. Awesome. Audience, we have people from everywhere, Chicago, Denver, Washington State. We have an in-person event in Denver soon. But we are here today to talk about from sailor to captain, how to transform your career in RevOps. My name is Eduardo. I am a community events manager at Modern Sales Pros. And for those of you not familiar with MSP, we are the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our modern sales pros. Our mission at MSP is to create an environment for our members to answer the toughest revenue questions out there and to help them see around corners they might not know about. And we do that through live sessions like this one you're about to experience. We have a robust online forum where you can go and ask questions and also answer questions from other sales leaders. We have quarterly summits. We have one coming up in October. I'm going to talk a little bit about the summit in October soon. And we also have in-person events, which is very exciting. If you're not yet part of the MSP team, you'll be invited to join right after this event. You will receive an email from me. As I mentioned, we have summits every quarter, and we have Sales Fever coming up October 17 to 19. I just dropped a link into the chat so you can go ahead and RSVP for the event. It's going to be amazing. You can hear from leaders from Gong, Cowboy Ventures, Kensai, Specket, and Sales Loft, and much, much more. But that's enough about other events. Let's focus on how to get the most out of this one. Um, Please use the Q&A. I was talking with my speakers backstage, and they're feeling a little low. It's Wednesday, mid of the week. They literally they need a little energy boost, and they were saying they love answering questions. So as Rachel said, she loves asking questions, but she also loves answering questions. So let's use the Q&A and the chat. Let's shower our speakers with questions so they can finish the week in a high note. And also, this panel is being recorded. You will receive a link for the recording right after the panel is done. And again, you will receive an email from me with the link and the key takeaways that you're going to get today. And I'm so excited about the key takeaways. I was looking at the presentation and it's fantastic. And the last thing about MSP is that we have amazing partners. And today, this event is brought to you by the team at Everystage. I have Bushan in here. Bushan, can you introduce yourself, please, and then give us a quick overview of what Everstage is all about?
Hey, folks. I'm Bhushan. I manage the solutions and strategy here at Everstage. And Everstage is the modern no-code commissions platform. We're working with the large enterprise organizations today to solve for their compensation needs and hope to basically serve a lot more and grow faster in the next couple of years.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Everystage, for sponsoring this panel. Um, they're doing amazing stuff. So if you want to hear a little bit more about Everstage, that is a button at the top of this page called "Request a Demo with our sponsor," and you will enjoy what they have to show you. But that's enough. Let's start this conversation. So, Bushan, I will pass the mic to you. You can ask Rachel to introduce herself, and then we can start this conversation. I will be listening live and taking a lot of notes, but I'll be back later for some outro. Okay?
Yep. Yeah, I think Rachel, you want to maybe take a minute to introduce yourself, and then we can jump in.
Awesome. My name is Rachel Laksamana. I am a program manager for go-to-market operations at Komodo Health. In go-to-market operations, we help develop, implement, and optimize the practice in which to launch products. Really excited to be here today and share what we know about go-to-market ops and RevOps.
Awesome. Yep. I think I think we already through introductions, but maybe a little bit of more background about myself. Before I was at Everystage, I used to run the revenue operations at an organization called Freshworks. They recently went IPO. So we were dealing with challenges at scale at that point, and hopefully we can share some of those strategies that work for me at that organization to get a strategic seat at the table in decision making, right? And hopefully, I think we can glad to answer questions around those as well. Awesome. Yep. And I think this is something that most folks who are in operations, not just RevOps, would align to, right? And there's going to be a ton of operational hassle that's happening across the house for every single department, specifically when you're working in cross-functional scenarios. And it's always going to be a challenge that how do you actually focus on actual growth levers and initiatives that really move the needle instead of picking up the specific tasks that just keep things chugging along, right? And that's going to be a very large challenge that we've seen with most operations teams. And it was the same for us as well. And Rachel, how has your experience around this been?
At least my experience within go-to-market operations, what you've detailed out here in this comic, I think is actually perfect because we do want to get involved into those strategic initiatives, but we do have a lot of conflicting things on our plate, right? So how are we optimizing our day such that we can actually accomplish these strategic initiatives and delivering on the asks of our stakeholders? So I hear you on this, Bhutan.
Awesome. And I think, one of the major challenges, right, why RevOps needs to be more strategic is because this is the one organization within the company that has a perspective on all the different go-to-market aspects. Right? They are working cross-functionally with every single team out there. They know the on-ground challenges, working with sales teams, working with active commercial teams, and they understand what the overall goals are because they're typically involved in some of the planning exercises as well. Given the holistic understanding, this team needs to be in a position where they can contribute or the right incentives to be pushed up to the teams, right? Like what are the next advances that need to happen? What are the corrective actions that need to happen if things are not going well? Otherwise, it turns into a scenario where even though you have all the information collated and available across the board, it's hard to get it synthesized in a format that leaders can actually take action on, right? And that's something that RevOps really needs to do it because that's the one team which actually has all that information and context available. Yeah. And I think, Rachel, you work very heavily cross-functionally during your product launches. I think that's one of the things you mentioned, right? So what do you typically see in those scenarios?
So in go-to-market operations, like I mentioned, our main function is to develop, implement, and optimize the launch process. So within that practice in and of itself, go-to-market really gets to identify different stakeholder bottlenecks within the commercial organization and the inefficiencies which ultimately impact your bottom line. I know working with healthcare data, the number one rule is that there's always a story to tell around the data, and that's truly where that activation is. So having that information, that context is really, really important. It also, I think it's really important to have that vision alignment, because it prevents you from seeing the forest for the trees. So easy to get like deep into those details. But by having that alignment, what I have seen is that I'm able to provide more valuable outputs in my projects for our launch processes, and then keep those teams on track towards that overall vision. One place I've really seen this is in the metrics for our launches. There's a lot of people that want to offer so many good measurements, but it doesn't quite tell the story of the launch. So having that vision alignment keeps your story super clear. We also see those operational complexities, like you had mentioned, Bhushan, by working with that variety of stakeholders across the organization. So what's cool is we've actually become this trusted source of truth that teams come to when they need a great answer on the progress of a launch, or the challenges, the current headwinds. So we really become that trusted partner for the team. And really, but becoming more strategic, you're demonstrating deeper value, and you're becoming an essential role in the decision-making process, which we'll talk about a little bit further on here. Bhushan, back to you.
Yep, I 100% agree, Rachel. And more importantly, I've seen that as in my career, whenever I've seen these large strategic problems to be evolved, rarely has been a moment where it has been solved without involving folks who are on the ground actually doing those activities. Right? They have the right inputs. The idea is, how do you synthesize it, make it easier for leadership to take action on it, right? I think that gap of communication is where RevOps can really be the team that fills that gap, right, and make sure that happens. And glad you mentioned trust. I think that heavily takes us into the next important topic we have, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. So, and I think pretty much everyone who's worked in sales ops or RevOps operations would know you are not immediately seen as a welcome party to a lot of these discussions, let's say with other go-to-market teams, typically because it's imagined that you would be the one who's going to be, let's say, pushing newer strategies, changes. More importantly, not everyone is a great receptive to change, because sometimes change is not set in the right context. It also is about setting targets. Also, a lot of time RevOps is the bearer of bad news in these scenarios when hard decisions need to be taken. So that automatically leads to a scenario where there is a lack of trust between the go-to-market leadership, between the RevOps team. Even though you are the source of truth for information, it creates a challenge with respect to openly sharing any issues that they have, basically bringing it up to you. That helps uncover any kind of specific growth levels, right? And that's been a common use case that we've seen across. And it's a very, I think, the biggest blocker, and that's why we put it right up there on the list. The biggest challenge we've seen teams not be able to move from just working on operational activities to be actually going ahead and pushing new strategies, new growth levels for the org. And I think repeated basic, like I said, there's going to be obviously work in operations. We have great automation tools across the board today for a ton of things, but those still have to be managed. There is always going to be change happening with respect to processes that need to happen. And again, obviously, for any fast-growing organization, if you're not having challenges, then probably the growth's not happening fast enough, right? Like that's a good sign to have. And RevOps team, again, being at the center of all the action, is sometimes responsible for dealing with these firefights, making sure that things keep moving, right? Systems breaking. And again, it goes back to even simpler things, right? Things as simple as fight over who gets credit for what deal, if there has to be splits between reps or so, right? And though in the overall context of things, it's not a important escalation or an important challenge, but it is something that really needs to be solved for maybe a few reps and leaders so that they can move forward. It just gets too much noise in the system, but it is something that needs to be solved for. But you're constantly involved in these kind of struggle. And again, a lot of this will come to you with not really any clear timelines in mind, right? So this will hit you any moment of the quarter. And if luck has it, most likely by your end of closing period, so that you have all this work piled up to get done in a short amount of time. And that's what we've seen. And the idea is, I don't think this is going to be a different scenario for everyone. This would be fairly common across most of the organizations that we see today. Yep, and obviously that leads us to the question of how do we change that, right? What are the specific things that can happen for you to get out of this vicious cycle of being stuck in these operational activities and actually being able to co-contribute in a way where you're part of the decision-making process. Yep. Yeah, I think, Rachel, you want to maybe add to this? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that number one challenge that Bhushan was talking about is that go-to-market teams don't trust RevOps, but it's also a similar sentiment for go-to-market operations as well. When we first set up the practice for go-to-market operations, in the state in which we wanted to be versus the type of resources that we had, that creates that tension. It's a good tension though, because what it does is it actually helps us build transparency, to help build those relationships and understand what is the function of each person within your ecosystem. So as someone who's helped lead the stand-up of go-to-market operation practices at several companies, the number one thing is relationships and knowing that ecosystem. I always joke with each of my stakeholders that it's my job to know your job, so that we can better understand each other, because truly understanding is what makes those relationships really, really strong and helps build that trust. So working with people across the organization, I work with sales, marketing, enablement, customer success, support, professional services, product, sales engineering, implementation teams. Honestly, the list goes on. But it's really important to be able to democratize that go-to-market operations execution through requirements, rather than templates and too much direction. What that does is that actually helps create more trust with your team, because it's an inclusive decision-making process. And this is especially helpful in metrics development, right here at the enabling the fair quota setting. When you bring in people from sales, marketing, enablement, all other parts of the business, to actually help set that quota, you're taking in data from marketing targets to what the realistic pipeline is, to the pricing of the product, to the implementation time. So you're able to actually see a more holistic view of what that quota should be and what that target should be. Again, I work with a highly collaborative team. So working with product, working with marketing and sales, we've established practices that are centered really around communication. So having very transparent Slack channels, weekly go-to-market stand-ups. I'm also involved in a lot of our work stream workshopping. We deliberate on priorities regularly. And then honestly, when things go sideways, it's time to get that group back together, and make sure that we're all contributing to that decision on how we want to move forward. So, within reason, it's important to keep that go-to-market operations democratized. And when I talk about inclusive decision making, it doesn't mean that there's a compromise that everybody's happy with. It's just that everybody has said their piece and we fully considered each of those relevant pieces of information before we go ahead and make that decision. But all of this really boils down to what's in it for them. What will enable each team member to do better. So that's kind of my take on the trust challenge there, Bhushan.
Awesome. I think that was great context, Rachel. And I think I fairly agree with you on most things. And I've just taken in my experience, I've done a couple of things here differently. As you said, right, being collaborative, I think a lot of challenges that we see today is because decisions are basically just pushed down. They're not included in the process of understanding why this is the number, like why is the quota fair or not. So I think you include them in an understanding process. It makes life a little easier for everyone. And more importantly, you have to also give back, right? It's, as you said, the relationship is the most important keyword. One of the things we did was I talked to most of the leaders and basically collaborative, like this master lifters issues that is happening across the board. And on that, I said, which are quick, low-hanging fruits that I can go facilitate and make happen, right? That helps you build instant goodwill with a few of these teams that are a good stepping stone for you to that, hey, now we have done something for you in that sense. And you are able to go ahead and at least hear us out or partner when we say why we have to do certain things or why the process needs to be updated. They're willing to go ahead and work with you in that scenario, right? And again, as I said, relationships take time. So this is again just a stepping point. The same process has to continue in that collaborative fashion, solving for their issues, making sure they are prioritized, but also making sure that they're bought into the specific understanding of how some of these decisions are being made, right? Just not keeping it as a black box. And it's difficult. Obviously, you can maybe take inputs from them. They can't be completely part of the decision-making process, but they still need to understand how that process works for them to basically see why the numbers are the way they are. And that actually helps eliminate a lot of the noise that you would see in the system. That goes back to like making sure that you're able to focus on specifically the critical areas that is important for those leaders, right? To make sure that they actually are able to deliver on their goals, because if they succeed, they're going to make sure their teams are doing well as well, right? And that alignment is basically what drives the whole success for RevOps and sales. And I think I'll maybe take a pause here and see if there's any questions around. So, awesome. Yeah. So, and I think this is something that you mentioned, Rachel, right? Like the repetitive tasks that we talked about a few times here. One of the biggest challenges is how do you actually find time? Some of the steps that Rachel mentioned and I mentioned probably need actual time for you to spend to understand those problems. Those conversations need to be had. You probably will have to sit down with them, understand their true challenges to figure out how things are moving, right? You have to also invest in your processes and tools at one point to make sure you're able to get some of that time so you can actually spend it on true value add activities and not just the regular process work, right? One of those are simple things is like CRM hygiene is something that pretty much everyone has dealt with as an issue. Everyone wants to make sure they have the most accurate and clean data available in the world, but it's always been a challenge that, hey, how do you make sure that it's easy enough for reps to actually go enter things in the system, but it doesn't take so much of their time that it's a problem that actually gets in the way of executing. So this is where these automation tools can be extremely helpful, and focusing on these sales workflows, even compensation in that matter, right? Like calculating commissions. I'm pretty sure ops teams are spending a good chunk of their time, not just calculating the commissions, but also going ahead and solving any conflicts around it. Going back to the whole thing, deal splits, clarifying why the numbers are the way they are, why they made so much money, and similarly like CRM data as well, right? Because hey, deals are not updated, numbers are not reflecting correctly. So on an average, this takes about close to 25 to 30% from an operations team's time, right? Just responding to these basic queries and getting that data clarified. Once these are actually set up, you get that time to basically invest in more value-add activities, having those conversations with your leaders, trying to go align different teams, figuring out those new initiatives that can help these teams work together, and more importantly, make sure they succeed in the goals, because that's the final goal for revenue operations in general. Their success truly lies when all their stakeholders succeed. Just getting a plan through is not something that's a metric for RevOps to actually call themselves as a win, right? Like at that point. I think we have a question here as well.
Yeah, it looks like currently marketing and product have a close connection, but sales, RevOps, and CS are getting left behind in conversations. Do you have suggestions on how to get a seat at the table? We're actually, I feel like I'm going to answer that a little bit later on in the slides, but I can give a little bit of a precursor. It's all about understanding how those decisions are made, so that you can be able to provide valuable input and be able to provide the lens that each of these teams needs in order to, kind of bring that chair up to get that seat at the table. So we'll dive into that just in a little bit here.
Thanks for the question, Anna.
Just one more thing here, Bhushan, on this particular slide. I think automating tasks sometimes is slept on, especially in the project management space. So just a couple of things that I think are helpful are kind of automating certain reminders, automating collection of updates, and automating how things are updated and how things are publicly available. That is really, really helpful, especially like from a project management lens. It may take a minute to set up, but it has provided so much more free time in order to actually address, the conflicts and the challenges, and facilitate really quality outputs. So, even though these repetitive tasks, automating them take the time to set up, it's worth it to be able to free up your time in order to address those more strategic things.
Yep, and I think the biggest advantage for me has been consistency, right? Like if these rules are set, why those values are being driven. There's no two ways about why the information is the way it is, and it's easy to go ahead and make decisions around whatever outputs you do actually get out of the system because it's consistent, it's repeatable, it's happening consistently across the board. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. I think, yep. I think we can move on to the third one. Yeah. Yeah, again, basically, this is the repetitive task I think that we mentioned earlier, right? Like everyone's here, most likely, in operations has dealt with the challenges regarding sales reps, say about territories, about accounts, about leads, right? Because there's some kind of a relationship between some companies or leads or who reached out first and how things set up. So these take up an enormous amount of time, right? And specifically, this becomes a challenge in growing organizations. Because we at that point you're ideally would be adding more products or you're opening up new territories or doing different kind of go-to-market changes. With that, obviously means new sales processes, new sales reps, new teams, new regions, and obviously there's going to be conflict because today anyone who's operating in that space would find some connections between different teams, different customers that they're reaching out to, and it is going to suck an insane amount of time from actual time available for operations teams to actually go work with value add activities. So one thing that we did, at least back at Freshworks last year, was making sure we had a very clear ROE document, like rules of engagement. It was an extensive one that we actually invested time into to basically consider all scenarios, put it out there, and make sure that was also included as part of onboarding and regular learning sessions that are set up for new teams who are joining the organization, or just like a refresher, right? For all, like said that, hey, there is a talk that's present here. Please do refer to this for all kind of scenarios, right? And only the exceptions need to then go up. Rest of it is going to be handled based on what specific challenges. It's going to be rare cases, right? That probably needs to be looked at. More importantly, there has to be turnaround times from all the associated teams. Today, as RevOps, you do not have the ability to, basically no one reports into RevOps, but RevOps has to go influence decision, make sense across the board, right? So the way that is, you have to set up some working guidelines between teams and internally as well, that the responses need to go out in a certain time. Everyone has to follow that. The same needs to be set up with associated functions, that this is mutually agreed upon, to make sure that everyone actually can stay on goal. Because for RevOps, for them to succeed, they need a lot of information from different teams to come in on time. If that's not happening, it's going to be challenging for them to go deliver on the metrics that they have to, and vice versa. That's how it works out, right? And more importantly, there's a plan, right? Sticking to the plan. That's important because there will be some random requests from some team leader that, hey, could you create this report or dashboard for me? I would want to take a look at it, right? Or sometimes these asks come in even though there's no clarity on what is the expected output from the information that would be used, right? So it's more of a thing for them where they just want to see the information and again, which is not wrong, but the idea is it will have to be done in spare time. It's not going to be prioritized with other items that are already part of the plan for you to go accomplish, let's say within this quarter or year. Because those timelines and those initiatives need to be hit. Going back to the other two things, making sure that you are able to set up those tools and processes. You're able to build trust with those, because these processes and tools are going to help you build trust with these organizations, right, that you have to work with. So I think managing your calendar, making sure there is a clear working understanding and timelines between the different functions that you operate in, and publishing as much documentation about rules and processes as available, I think would really bring back a lot of that time that's lost to the different teams out there.
And just a couple things to add to this, Bhushan, here, because I agree with everything that you've said. At least, from go-to-market, a lot of that's true for us too. Is as a program manager, we kind of set up that rhythm of business as like the number one thing that we focus on, right? Is like what is the rhythm of business to get a product out the door? But it's all about creating those expectations for your team. For us, it's that launch calendar, how we handle change requests, the ways in which we communicate, the deliverables that are provided as part of one of these projects. It's really nice to have something like a menu. But I think what I want to also add to this is that there is a significant amount of discovery that we do with these teams before we publish any type of like ways of working document with another team. Because if you're trying to impose a process on another person and another team, you also have to understand, what those impacts are for that team. Otherwise, you may have your sales team filling out, 12 different forms just to get from, A to B across a deal. So really understanding what those workflows and what those interdependencies look like before you publish those documents is really, really important. And then again, I've said this for years. I'm a firm believer that you can train anyone to work with you in the style that you need or that your team needs. It just takes a lot of patience and training. And what I kind of see, where I see people fall down a lot is the training element, and the fact that, you really need to stay diligent in pointing people to those resources and pointing people to that new process. It typically takes about 3 to 6 months to actually see, a change, that's sustainable, so that you can iterate on that and improve it. So don't give up too soon is the other type of piece of information that I want to give there.
Yep, I think that's very true. As I said, right? Like, it has to be a feasible solution that actually works and does not take away from the end goal of executing well. I think that's the most important keyword here.
Right.
Awesome. Yep. And obviously, I think this is just more of an extension or more towards a technical execution of how you would achieve the previous step, right? Specifically, the stuff Rachel pointed out. How do you build this specific support out, right, for the different teams? You have to basically clarify what's the rule set going to be for these scenarios, right? And again, there has to be recurring training for the associated teams, new members coming in, refresher courses for the existing team, to make sure that the process is ingrained in terms of how things are going to work, right? And one major challenge that we've seen is teams try to maintain their own data stacks, right? That was a big problem, that there's always a marketing number and there's a sales number, right? That most companies are arguing towards that, hey, that's not the right number, right? And we have a different number. And rather than actually solving the challenge or looking at what the problem is, the debate usually turns into who has the right data or the methodology of the data gathering rather than the solutioning of the problem itself. So typically the best way that we found is you should have a team, if possible, to manage analytics, right? Where you define, as I said, with agreement between these teams, what is the definition of that metric, right? And that team can own maybe the infra and the associated reporting perspective of it, so that it's again coming from an independent third party. So that's not something that you own, but the definition of that metric, how are we going to arrive at this metric, is something that RevOps working with the rest of the teams can define, right? Trying to get into the specific of implementing new tools, again, goes down the same lane. That's not a great use of the time for the revenue operations team. There would be teams who are much more better equipped to handle these kind of scenarios, right? And set those up. While there's a lot of emphasis on like learning by doing, and that can happen, but it's taking away from the limited and the most important resource that's available to the team, that's time, to get things done that are more important and more value added, right? And I think those three pillars, if sorted clearly, will help you get out of all the unnecessary escalations or just the how-to questions that come up to you, right? Okay, how is this supposed to work? Why is this number different from mine? Like, I'm seeing two different dashboards, say my number doesn't line up, right? And suddenly some things are not working as well because we got it wrong in terms of configuration, because we're not the expert at specifically setting that up. So making sure there's a centralized repository for the information, but it doesn't mean that the actual data and construction of the infra also needs to be owned centralized. It could be owned by independent teams which have specific knowledge and expertise in those areas.
And Bhushan, I think the overall theme that I'm seeing, from the slide 4 here is it's all about scaling and growth. And so just one element that I want to add from, the go-to-market operations perspective is, as you're designing and operationalizing certain things that are going to market, you also want to think in that same scalable lens. How can we automate something? How can we build something that's sustainable, a process that's sustainable for other program managers to execute on? Because we do have commercial program managers that will help execute on some of the operational requirements that for each of our launches. So making sure that you've got a scalable mindset as you are building and operationalizing is key in order for them to be sustainable later on. So you hit the nail right on the head there, Bhushan.
I think you can move to the next one. Yep. I think, and that's the final summary across the board right there. When you're spending lesser time on the unnecessary escalations or the urgent but not important kind of activities, it means you left no time to basically have those important conversations with the right leaders to understand what's going to be the next big thing for your organization to succeed and grow. What are the challenges that are actually stopping the organization from going faster or going at the right rate that you need to? So that time that you get back from the first 4 initiatives basically again needs to be spent specifically in this direction. There have to be regular connects with the leaders and the associated teams to understand how are the current processes working, what are the challenges they're seeing, any trends that they're seeing. Give back to them with respect to solving any operational challenges that are easy to do, so that again you keep working on that relationship, helping that out. Provide intel to them so that they are better at their execution. A simple thing is helping them some more accurate forecasts, right? Like how that would work. Giving them understanding and patterns and data for their annual planning exercise, so that they are more equipped to basically come back and understand the information that's going to be presented as part of the annual planning exercise. You need to know how your team performed. You need to be able to put that in a concise fashion. And one of the things that we did is we created like a summary dashboard, if you would imagine, specifically for this, that contained the information of all, let's say, the last 2 years immediately. So they could go and quickly summarize and get all that information and be ready, right? Like, this is what I want to come back. Why I feel certain numbers are impossible to do. Why I believe that this is the right way, or this is the area we want to, any kind of cases they want to make as part of those initiatives. They also have the ability to go justify any kind of plans that they want to put in motion. And that's going to be critical, right? Like finally, so the idea is this is where the true magic will finally happen. Where you'd be able to work with these teams to discover what is the specifics that can help the company grow, and more importantly, remove blockers from them in terms of succeeding. Yeah.
And I think like being transactional, no team really wants to be seen as a transactional stakeholder. But oftentimes, you can be kind of like pigeonholed into that transactional type of relationship. So how do you kind of bust out of that, right? And Bhushan, I think you've offered a lot of really good information here. I just want to add a few more things, but I want to also revisit Anna's question about how do you get that seat at the table, right? Like how do you invite yourself to that table? So I recently wrote a LinkedIn post about this, but if you want to be part of that decision making, you have to offer that essential and valuable information. And just like Bhushan said, never blindly offer that information that you think might be relevant. Understand really how that decision is made first. And so I like to dive into kind of like a design thinking and discovery type of mindset, where I make some assumptions about what my stakeholders actually need strategically, and find ways to either confirm those assumptions or debunk those assumptions. Once I have all that information, then I'm able to go get, the data, the insights, the analytics that would be helpful. But really what that does is it kind of like steers you in a direction of more consultative type of input, rather than just, here's the report, what else do you need from me? Make the report tell a story, or make that challenge tell a story. One of the things that I do within go-to-market operations is we provide success metric report outs for each of our launches on a regular cadence. This happens like clockwork, right? So after a certain period of time, depending on the launch, our leaders get updates on what is actually happening with the launch. It's not just numbers. We're telling the entire story. We dig deep into, okay, the numbers aren't fantastic here. They're not what we expected. Why? And so it takes a couple weeks, to really get that information and get that story kind of tightened up so that you're delivering a story that your leaders care about. So really like having that information and being committed to that, like gathering that information provides, a different perspective on the other challenges that may need to be addressed. And you see these kind of come up over and over and over again, and you see what the impact is repeatedly, then again, it is something that you can go back and provide data around, provide that story around. So I think it's important, to invest in that discovery and invest in the why before you go ahead and provide that information, and that helps bring that chair up to get the seat at the table.
And I think a great part of that is, I think discovery is something that's set very heavily on sales. I think that's important for operations teams as well. When you get that odd request for data, rather than just providing the question, should be, hey, can you maybe share what you're trying to accomplish, right, with this? Maybe they are onto something. There's a bigger challenge that they're trying to solve, and you can work collaboratively to basically figure out something that's more relevant. Right. And I think that's worked well for us when we try to understand what is the actual need, what's the true problem that you're trying to get to by looking at this information. That helps with the foundation of maybe what are the next steps that we can work with you to solve for them. And more importantly, even maybe understand that it's a bigger problem that's not even understood. There's a risk that we don't know. Maybe they are trying to uncover it. Right. So as I said, the people working on the problems typically have the understanding of what's happening, and they'll be the one to guide you in that direction of where the solution may lie.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think one more thing on that annual planning element there. Something that I think has been like an important driving force is, at least within go-to-market operations, we manage a calendar of launches. And it was a request, by our leaders to kind of see, what's coming out, like, what is the timeline for these? How does it align to other activities? So we kind of also do that annual planning activity that RevOps does. I think by having that request, though, what we've done is we've actually influenced other leaders to think strategically about how they would like to launch their products, right? So kind of looking at it like holistically throughout the year rather than, this is ready, let's ship it. This is ready, let's ship it, right? So I think there's also, as there's requests, for that annual planning, or if that's something that we want to provide to become more strategic, it also influences other good practices and influences growth across the team. So just know that, by having that practice in and of itself, you're also influencing other stakeholders to become more strategic and really, enable their growth too. So just a little extra on there.
I think that's great addition, Rachel. I think I have a question here from James. Mm-hmm. How can one stay updated with the latest RevOps trends and best practices? What's your say on that, Rachel?
From my perspective, from RevOps side of the house, I don't have too much to offer in that regard. But from the go-to-market operations side of the house, I am huge into leadership books, processes that you can actually take from product management and apply into your operations work. I actually come from a product management background, and utilizing kind of the latest and greatest trends within product management and applying that to like the ops work, I think also is super helpful from the go-to-market standpoint. But Bhushan, I think you may have another input on the RevOps specifically then.
So I think for me, the most important sources happen actual communities because like RevOps is still relatively newer compared to like a sales officer. So they've been experts who've been working in those domains for a much longer time, right? And they've seen it, and they have a lot of insights with respect to how even the newer trends are developing. They've seen this transition happen. So I heavily rely on communities basically to reach out to folks and get an understanding of the problems I have, basically post this out, get a fair understanding of what's happening, because the challenges are the solutions and the problems can be completely different from the scale of your business, the industries, right, and the stage of growth you're in. So I don't think there's a one size fits all in terms of getting these answers. You would be better if you put these questions out, talk to those specific folks in the communities. And one thing, if there's a community, is a relatively smaller community of RevOps professional, but I've found them to be extremely helpful. Like just going out and reaching out, I think most people are more than happy to connect and share advices in terms of how they face those challenges. And I think that's one of the biggest thing of latest for me, where I understand, hey, how are they handling these challenges at their businesses today? Right? Can I go ahead and incorporate some of those processes today at my site? And maybe where did we go wrong? Do analysis, maybe share that. Is there an alternative we could have done to basically solve these things? I think that kind of mentorship and support from the community has been the biggest source for me, at least, to basically go and understand these challenges. I think we have one more.
Mm-hmm. We do have a question from Thomas. What strategies do you use to ensure optimal resource allocation and utilization across all operations? Do you want to give that a shot first, Bhushan, or do you want me to go for it?
Go for it, because I think you're working with a ton of different teams, basically. And I'm assuming there's a lot more that goes into this product launch for you.
Yeah. So from our perspective, it's important to have a capacity assessment and a capacity plan. So we're still, in early stages of developing those capacity assessments and capacity plans. But it's important to have that and be able to align it to each of those each of those launch projects, so that who's available for what when. But there's so many different ways that you can create a capacity assessment. But again, it's really customized towards your team and what they do. So each team may have a slightly different capacity assessment and capacity rubric, just based on the nature of what they do and their roles and responsibilities. I know that there's a couple tools out there that are helpful in aligning those capacity assessments and capacity rubrics, and kind of really automate that. I'd have to go find the exact name of the software that does it, but there are a few tools out there that help automate it.
Yep. And I think going back to what Rachel said, capacity assessment, right? Like just assessing what is the actual requirements for making sure for these different operational areas. If you get an understanding of what are the actual key tasks required on those, the next step is basically seeing how much of that could be, let's say, automated with a process, right? If it's just a knowledge gap set of filling, that basically means that's something that we have to allocate with respect to documentation or a tool that a knowledge base that helps with this kind of information, right? Once we've automated as much as you can, or at least have plans to that, I think the next step is basically understanding where would you want to allocate resources. And again, this is where you'll have to have extreme discipline to basically say that, okay, I'm going to only invest this much time and keep certain time carved out for the other strategic initiatives that you need to happen, right? It cannot be a haphazard call that happens because just because there's a lot of noise, things change. So you have to stick to that priorities. Don't take up those ad hoc requests. If the discipline is followed, you will be able to go through the year with the plan you have in place, right? Most teams today basically get swept up in that hey, suddenly there's a request for 20 reports coming in from different teams, and now you've lost all track of what was the actual thing that was getting built. So understanding the actual requirements at the task level, making sure automating as much as possible on those, and then finally sticking to that plan. That's the biggest one. And this is where you need to have that buy-in from the strategic leaders of these different functions, where you can work with them to say, hey, what is the real thing in terms of that 20 asks? What is the two priorities for you that I can focus on, right? Because that's the true bandwidth I have allocated. Let me work with you on those three. And if you have built that trust, they will be willing to work with you, right, to figure out what those top three priorities are to make that work.
Yeah, I love staying tight with the project management type of mindset there. Getting those key tasks aligned to the actual capacity itself. That makes everything so much easier in order to make sure you do have the right resources across your entire project.
I think, yeah. So I think we've covered the major 5 assets that we thought about, right? Like, again, one is simply eliminate the trust barrier that exists today while working with the different teams, build goodwill by solving some of the low-hanging fruits or some of the problems that are, let's say, not important, but are very pestering for these teams, right? It could be as simple as basically setting up a CRM workflow, but like, hey, no one's found the time to do it yet. But making sure you work with the different teams, solve those low-hanging fruits, get the goodwill built, bring them into understanding of the decision-making process of why things are going to be decided, and then what's the timeline associated to that, so that they feel more as a partner to these decisions and less as this is something that being forced down from a centralized team, right? So I think that helps bridge that gap. Automate as much as possible. There is going to be a ton of repetitive work that's happening across the board. There is a plethora of tools in the market today that solve for a ton of these challenges. See which are taking the most from your bandwidth today. Start with the prioritization order with the associated budget. Ask for the budgets to make sure you're able to go get these tools in place, bring those timelines in with that product on, so that you find time to go actually do some of the strategic activities available to you. More importantly, stick to your plan. There is going to be challenges with respect to certain flare-ups or firefights, but set expectations with teams, right? To say, hey, this is the SLA that is set up. This is how it's going to move. Again, work with the leadership to see what are the actual true important challenges that need to be solved for. Again, prioritize accordingly, make that clear for all the teams to basically work with you. I think that kind of clarity will really help foster the relationship super clear. And RevOps is supposed to, as I said, understand the information coming from different areas. It should not probably be stuck in actually setting up the infrastructure or the tools. Let's get the associated teams who have the right expertise to go set those up, right? And because that's going to happen faster, that's going to happen with more accuracy, right? It will give a lot more time back and control to RevOps to basically make sure they're able to get the right goals that they want to achieve, right? And I think the final thing is, once you have all this time, you have to put it in action, right? You need to have those conversations. You need to suggest those initiatives to those leaders. Use the goodwill that you've built so far to take this to the higher level, right? Tell them that, hey, this is an initiative that the team has brought to us, and I think it's going to work, and I want to give this out. And if you have buy-in from across the board, that's how things will actually start moving, right? So you've actually set everything up for yourself by doing steps 1 through 4. Fifth is actually putting the metal out there, right? Making the initiative, have a great plan built out, use your relationships to basically push it through, and get people on board with some of those big changes you want to basically drive in the organization. Yeah.
I think the one thing that I'm going to add here, Bhushan, is just, I think there's something to be said about taking on the ambiguous problem or the problem that no one wants to solve. I think that shows a lot of initiative, beyond just, what's the easy low-hanging fruit. Obviously, it's important to make sure that ambiguous problem or the problem that no one wants to solve is actually, aligned to the strategic goals. But I think, finding those problems that, again, really nobody wants to touch, and taking that initiative and moving it forward, also demonstrates, a level of, courage, right? To be able to tackle something that no one else wants to. So if you're continually that person, then you'll also build that rapport with your team, and they'll go, oh, I don't know how to solve this, but you know what? Bhushan's probably fantastic to ask this question to, and to help lead something this ambiguous or this complex. So you're also building rapport, by taking on something a little bit more challenging. So just a little bit of extra to add there.
Yep, and I think we have a question from Vanessa as well. How often is the long-term vision revisited and adjusted based on annual performance? You maybe want to take a stab at this, Rachel?
Yeah, I can do that. So what I've seen work really well is like a quarterly assessment. So this is not, again, specific to one particular place that I've worked. I've just seen it work really well to revisit this quarterly, depending on how quickly your business moves. So if your business is more established and mature, maybe it's twice a year instead. But I think a quarterly assessment is really important to make sure that you're on track with those KPIs and that there's still alignment to that overall strategic decision. The one thing that I see as a challenge most often is that there's so many people that stray from that strategic decision, or they make changes too quickly before those decisions can actually provide measurement and metrics too. So even if you're doing, these quarterly assessments on that long-term vision and those KPIs, don't be too quick to make adjustments until you've had enough data and enough time for change management to take place, because some of these things may be relatively foreign concepts or new concepts for your team members. So give it time too. But I'd say quarterly is probably a good cadence in which to do that. Bhushan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think one basic last thing, as you mentioned QBRs, right? I think one thing is making sure that is a consistent format to the QBR, right? Making sure you're able to go compare from quarter to quarter in a consistent fashion in terms of how performance is trending, first of all. And the second important part is when these annual plans or long-term visions are created in an organization, they are always also, let's say, scenarios, right? Like it's always like, hey, if this works, this is sort of the trajectory we're going to be on. And if this doesn't work, then this is the fallback plan. That's one of the key jobs for RevOps is to basically also foresee risks, right? What are the challenges we may see and what would be the different actions that we would have to take if these thresholds are hit, right? If you're not, let's say, you're pushing at the marketing thing is not with the, so the kill switch is basically we're going to stop doing this, right? Those things have to be baked in right at the plan itself, right? And because the delay on some of these actions can be extremely costly, right? Not just from a monetary expense, the time that's gone by, you may not have a chance to recover from some of these actions. So that goes back into the planning and being more strategic. But when you are setting these initiatives, these visions are created, there have to be plans for different levels of performance or how good or bad it has worked. If things are off track, you should be the one calling that out that, hey, we're on track or we're off track. Make sure management is aware that things are not moving in the right direction or this is the risk that we're seeing, and work with them to basically move to that secondary plan or at least tweak it so that this happens. And again, QBRs are a great place to go ahead and do that analysis. But like Rachel said, right, you still have to give it time because that's also an understanding that, what if your sales cycles are 6 months, you're not going to be able to see those changes happen over a quarter, right? Like it's simple as that. You still have to wait till that action can actually be explained.
Yep. And Bhushan, that's awesome. I mean, it's all about balance, right? Balance and making sure that you're planning, for that critical path, for those risks, for those dependencies too. So also having, that backup plan in your back pocket. So couldn't agree more on that one.
Second, I'm trying to bring Eduardo onto stage. I think facing some challenges here. Hey, is it?
Hi, can you hear me now? Oh, good. Thank you so much, Bhushan and Rachel. That was an amazing conversation. Thank you, audience, for the awesome questions that you put in the chat here. We love having you here, audience. Thank you to Everystage for sponsoring this event. They are doing great things, so be sure to check them out. Again, thank you, Bhushan and Rachel. This was fantastic. I'm pretty sure our audience got a lot of action items in there. Thank you, Caitlin, for joining us. I see you in the chat. The recordings will be and key takeaways will be available soon in our website, and I will also send a follow-up email to everyone in the audience here today with the links so you can get all this information again when you most need it. Bhushan and Rachel, we can say bye to our audience and go hang out backstage for a little bit. Audience, I'll see you next time.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.